Well, I want to share a few more pictures as we talk a bit more. Um, and I want to thank Sandy, Doug, and Josh for sharing so beautifully the work we've been doing as an organization. Really, really appreciate it. Back when we were at that space, when Sandy and I were at that space of how do we kind of push things deeper for people whose lives were getting smaller, who had had changes in their lives, or who we weren't doing such a good job with? I happened to come across something called CYNIFEN. And this is a general outline of what that process is. It comes from Dave Snowden, a guy from Wales, and the name CYNIFEN is also Welsh. And it's really what it is. It's a way of looking at the world in order to try and make sense of it and where we fit into it, so that we can act in it in the best way possible. And this framework, there's something about this. I'm going to take you through it in a very abbreviated fashion. But there's something about it that really struck me and helped me after almost 40 years of doing this work to think differently about how we do the work. So you can see the diagram on the right-hand side of the page, and there are 5 domains in CYNIFEN, and I'll talk about them in just a little bit. We'll start with the part on the right, and that's the ordered and predictable world. And in the ordered and predictable world, there's a cause and effect to everything. If you do this, then that will happen. And if you do this again, then that will happen again. And it's not good or bad, it's just one way of making sense in the world. So in this ordered and predictable section, there's 2 different places, or 2 different pieces, 2 different domains. One is the clear domain, and in the clear domain, if you have a little training or a little instruction, or if you're told what to do, or you have an instruction booklet, it's pretty obvious about what to do. And it could be multi-steps, it could be something simple, but if you follow the instructions, it's clear and you can do it and you'll get the same outcome every time. In the complicated domain, sometimes it's really harder to figure out what the cause and effect is and how to do what you need to do to make something happen. And this is where you might need to call in experts and have expert analysis to kind of figure out where to go next. But you can, with that kind of support, figure out the best way to do stuff. And again, there is a cause and effect. So if you figure it out and you do it, you'll get to the desired place. And one of the things that struck me is that the systems that we work in, they really show up in this ordered world. Medicaid, licensing, audits, documentation, the way we do people's person-centered plans nowadays is ordered. I mean, the person-centered plans for the system, not real planning, that we all like to do, but for the system, they're drop-down boxes, right? It's a very ordered world. And there's places for this, doing this well, organizing things, it keeps us going, it gets the money. So for instance, this, we don't have to get into this, but just as an example, you can have a process that's very complicated. This is billing with our electronic visit verification system in New Jersey. And if you start at the left and go to the right and follow every piece of that process, you will end up with receiving payment. That's a good thing. And that's important for that part of the work. So that's one side of this diagram. But sometimes we come into circumstances like this, and credit to John, who didn't make this, but he did share it with me. And I'm not sure who actually wrote this or made this, but sometimes in our work, and I think almost always in the stuff that I care deeply about, this is the situation we're confronted with. And there's a million different avenues and a million different ways you can go. And trying to move from A to B is not going to get you where you want to go. So you can have that ordered system and that beautiful EVV diagram, which is really quite pretty, but it's not going to help you when you're in this kind of situation. And that's where, when we move into the unordered and unpredictable part of the diagram, that's where I find things to be very useful. And in fact, I love this part of the diagram. And this is a place where if we do things in that domain of the diagram, multiple results are possible. So it's not like there's a cause and effect and you do it and you'll get your bill paid. But in this domain, whatever you do, any number of things can happen. Like walking outside that door in that picture that we just saw, you could go in a whole bunch of different directions and maybe wind up where you want to go from very many of them. So that place is known as a place of complexity. And honestly, I think our most interesting work happens in that domain. That's the place where we help people to build a life. That's the place where we get to know community. That's the place in relationships, because all of that stuff is complex. There's any number of steps we can take at any given moment and at any given time. And they may lead us where we want to go, and they may not lead us where we want to go. So we have to figure out how to navigate in that space of complexity in a whole different way. And the way to work in complexity is to probe stuff, to try stuff, to learn stuff, and then discover what more is possible from what you're trying. So you could talk to all the experts in the world, you can follow all the instructions in the world, you could come up with a 100-step plan on how to help someone get connected in their community. It's not going to get you where you want to go. It's not going to help you help someone build a life. And the way you help someone build a life is to probe, to try stuff. And so what Sandy and I started doing, and Doug was out with us the very first day that we did this neighborhood walking. He was out with Diamond and I. What we started doing is we decided to probe neighborhood walking. We'll try it. We'll see what happens. We'll have no outcomes in mind. We're just going to see what we discover. We'll talk to people. We'll meet people. We'll get names. We'll see what's in the neighborhood. Where are the good coffee shops? Where are the good chocolate shops? Where are the good restaurants? Where are the good other stuff as well? I'm always attracted to the food places. And we'll see what we learn. We'll see what kind of gifts are in the neighborhood. We'll see how we can increase our own social capital in the neighborhoods where we live and work. And we'll see what we learn from that. And we'll do that over time. And for those things that work, for those things that actually kind of prove to change something or offer some promise to us, we'll do more of those things. And for those things that don't work, we'll do less of those things. And we'll keep trying, and we'll keep trying, and we'll keep trying, and we'll build on what we like, and what's leading us in a good direction. And I believe that this space of complexity is the space that offers us innovative practice. So it's only here, when we are probing and trying stuff, will we find answers that aren't just the same old things that we've always done. So it was based upon kind of taking a look at this framework that Sandy and I started thinking, what we want to do lies in this space of complexity. So let's try something totally different. Let's walk in the neighborhoods. Don't think about outcomes. Don't think about connecting anyone. Just go out and do something different and see what happens and see what we learn. Now, two things, well, maybe just one thing for now that I've noticed about this, maybe two things. One of them is that a lot of people aren't comfortable in complexity because we don't know. There's multiple possible outcomes. We don't know what might happen. We don't know if we're going to try something and it's not going to go well. And a lot of people like to work in a situation where, you have your checklist of 15 different things, and then you go through the day and you do them. So if that space isn't comfortable for everybody, then, and this is the second thing, those of us who are leaders need to figure out how to make that space more comfortable. And I think one of our biggest challenges is if we want to help people build a life, have relationships, have community, have connections in community, make real contribution in community, we have to figure out how to be out there in complexity with the people who we work for, and with the people who work for them, and with their neighbors, and with all the other people that are in their surrounding neighborhood. So there's two other domains. Don't really have a lot of time to go through them. The domain of chaos is also part of the unordered world. And essentially, when there's a chaotic situation going on, you got to set some limits. You got to get it back into a reasonable place. And then you can move it to one of these other domains to figure out how to move forward. And the question mark in the middle is if you're not sure what domain you're in. So if you don't think about it, if you don't think, this is a complex issue, we're going to have to probe and try lots of stuff and see what happens, you fall back on what you've always done. And a lot of what we've always done hasn't really helped people to have a good life. Now, there's not time to get into this in detail, but we are going to post something that has a couple of videos and an animated keynote and a little written summary of some of this stuff, so you'll be able to read more about it. And I am happy to talk more about it at any time at all. This is like one of my favorite topics in the world. But I want to end up by just talking a little bit about leading in complexity, and doing it in a way that we can cultivate the culture that we want to have, a culture that supports Doug going out and walking around the community, and that's a paid activity, and that's what his work is, and that it becomes ingrained in people that that's what our work is. So the first thing is, I think we as leaders need to embrace the unpredictable and the messiness. We can't have checklists for everything. We can't have, if we try and order everything, and we have to do the stuff in the ordered world, don't get me wrong, we have to bill, we have to pass our licensing inspections, and I'm okay passing them kind of just mediocrely, so we're not spending too much time on them. We have to do that stuff, but we have to create spaces in our organization where we can appreciate the messiness, so that people who don't feel as comfortable in that space can feel like it's okay to be there. We have to encourage the probing and trying new stuff, and we have to create time and space for people to be able to do that, to be able to walk around neighborhoods, and to be able to stop in the coffee shops, and to be able to hang out in the barber shops, which are some of my favorite places as well, along with the food shops. So we have to make that a part. That's not something we do on the side, but that's a part of what our work is, and that's expected of everybody. We need to find space so that we can learn together, because trying things, if you then don't learn from them and make adjustments, that doesn't really work. So every time Diamond comes to town, and sometimes when he doesn't, about every 3 to 4 months, we come together as a group. Everybody who's been participating in this in any way, shape, or form is invited to come. We do it at mine and Dave's house. Sometimes we have 20 or 25 people. Sometimes we have fewer people. It really depends on where people are at that given moment. But we come together, people take pictures of what they're doing. We share the stories. We spend a day sharing stories with hospitality and food. And after each story, we reflect on what we can learn from that story, and we think about what more is possible. What can we try next? So that becomes a practice that we do. The probing is something that's built into the organization. The learning and sharing stories is built into the organization. And then what you see happening over the course of the past 7 years or so is that people are pulling together stories all the time. And Sandy and I are getting texts from people with pictures and little videos on them of interesting things they discovered in a neighborhood. So it becomes something that becomes a regular part of our culture and what we do. You have to celebrate failure. If we want people to try something that's innovative and different, the guy who first turned me on to this whole idea of CYNIFEN, he said when I first heard it from him, his name's Chris Corrigan, by the way, he said, if you're doing innovative stuff, you're going to fail at least 60% of the time. He said, if you're not failing, then you're just doing the same old stuff that you already know how to do. But people don't feel comfortable failing. So we have tried to figure out ways to celebrate failure. You threw a party, it was a complete bust, nobody came, okay. That's great. What can we learn from that about this neighborhood and the way you gather in this neighborhood? And we try and celebrate that. And we try and celebrate that in the same way we celebrate when things go really well. Because you can tell people it's okay if you try something and it doesn't work out. But people believe it when they experience it. Just like you can tell people that you can walk around the neighborhood, meet people, build your social capital, they believe you when they experience it. So all of this, when people can embody it, it makes more sense to them. We try and honor the gifts of everyone. If we want a culture where we're going to go out and find the gifts in the neighborhood, we have to find the gifts in the people we work for. We have to find the gifts in the people who work for them. And we have to show that we value all of those gifts. We cannot expect people to value the gifts they find in a neighborhood if they don't feel the gifts, their own gifts, are valued. So one of the things we've done a whole bunch of stuff. This is just one quick example. We've given little grants to people, both staff people and people we work for, sometimes in partnership, sometimes separately, to try things in their neighborhood or community that they're excited about. $100, $150 to throw a party, or to do a sketch and salad night, or to do a community activity. But these are based on what people feel passionate about and what they have to offer. And if we're honoring the gifts of the people themselves, the staff and the people they're working for, it's much easier for them to go out and honor the gifts of the people they meet in their neighborhood, and even notice the gifts. And it changes kind of what people look at from what do I need into what do we have to offer, and what does this neighborhood have to offer. We have to invest in what we believe is important. If we think this is important, getting to know communities and neighborhoods, then as CEO, that's where I need to spend my time. As executive director, that's where Sandy needs to spend her time. We need to invest in Diamond coming to spend time doing that. If we just say, go do this, we think it's important, that's one thing. But if we're actually investing our time, our energy, and our resources in it, we're showing what we think is important. And I just think a big part of this is not just using the words, but living it. And finally, we have to develop practices. So all these things that we try and do over the course of the 7 years have become practices. Neighborhood walking is now part of people's onboarding. Everybody walks regularly. Doug, organized his visit with the people he was talking about. So it was about the walking. We regularly get together and share stories. We regularly do the grants. There's a whole bunch of things we do. But what happens is when these become practices make it into habit. And the habit then makes it into what your organizational culture is going to be. So the practices actually can shift your organizational culture over time. And it also shifts kind of how you're seen in the neighborhood. So that's it, except for just showing you just a couple of clips of art shows and a party for someone's mom, and meeting folks at a cool store in Rhode Island, and a big old backyard party, Ricky starting a small business, and a gathering at a church, inviting in, as Doug's church, inviting in all the neighbors in the community from the church to think together about how they can be of service in that community. But those are just some of the things that have come from this. So that's it. And I strongly recommend you read and look at all the CYNIFEN stuff, because I think CYNIFEN is awesome and wonderful.